Hello, future designers and developers, and this is going to be a tutorial on how to take something like this and turn it into a layout like this. Now, before we were using floats, and that's a little clunky, so we're going to be learning something new called CSS grid layout. So we're going to be using a grid to throw these pieces into our website. So the very first thing that I want to point out is that when I created these, I used IDs instead of classes. And that's really important for when we start doing multiple page setups, because we may have sidebars, content, and footers, headers, and mains inside of those web pages as well. So I used IDs instead. They work very similarly to classes, but they can only be used once. They're really unique to that page. So I'm going to show you what the syntax looks like for those CSS. That's a little note when we get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to throw everything that I have right here, my nav, my main, my sidebar, my three contents. Oop, they're all saying content 1 right now. We want to throw all of those into a container. And that's essentially just a div. So I'm going to say div with a class named container. So we'll throw everything inside of that. And then what we are going to do is we are going to set up our grid. So let's go into our CSS document. And inside of here, we're going to start, just because I don't like those gaps on the side there, I'm going to start by changing our body's margins to 0. So body margin 0, just to fill in those gaps, because I don't like that. All right, so now we're going to start editing that container. So I'm going to call out the class container, and then I'm going to say our display option. So how we display this, we're going to display this into a grid. Now, our grid essentially is going to break everything up into little boxes that we can throw this into. And we do that by basically creating a table. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add columns. So I'll show you, I have created this visual. We are going to start by creating this, where we're going to section off our website into these 4 columns. So I'm going to go into here and I'm going to say grid template columns, and then we want to specify the size for each of this. Now, we are going to make this a responsive website in the next video, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that each of those rows is 1 fraction of the page, and there are going to be 4 rows. So if I say 1 FR, that means that 1 fraction of the page is going to be the first grid. Now I'll put a space and say 1 FR again, saying there are now 2 columns and each of them is a fraction of the page, so we have 1/2 and another half. So if we continue like this and we do 1 FR, then we'll have 3 columns. Let's do 1 FR, and now we have 4 columns. And this is what we're looking to do. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all equal. They're all equal. They all have 1. So that is our columns. So now we want to do our rows. So we're going to say grid template and rows. So inside of our grid template rows, we are now going to specify the thickness of each of these rows. Oh, before I do that, let's set our height. So our height is actually going to be the viewing height. So the height of our entire view, which is VH. So we're going to say 100% of our view height. So our VH. So now it fills up our full screen over here. Even if we spread this out, already you can see that it's a little bit more responsive of a design. Cool. So now we want to set up our rows. Right now it bumped these 3 down to the bottom because we only have enough room to have 4 items split up in between there. So for our very first row, we're actually going to, let's take a look at the template over here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, but they're at different thicknesses. So let's place this over here. So really this first one is very small. So when we make this fraction, I'm actually going to do, we'll say that this is 0.1 3 FR. So it's going to be pretty small. And then, and right now it's saying 0.3 and this remainder would be 0.7, but we're going to make the next one even bigger. So if we look at this, this is pretty much the majority or a good half of our page. So I'm going to just keep this one at 1 FR right there. We'll make it even bigger, 1.2 FR. Cool. We'll see, we might make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to keep this at 1 FR and then make this a little bit smaller than 1 FR. So 1 FR, and then our last one will be 0.8 FR. Now, not everything has moved into those spots yet, and that's because we haven't told them what content goes into each of these. Because right now, we have nav just occupying this top little corner that we have created. But we want nav to occupy the whole top row. So we have to set this up. So I am going to call out grid area, grid template areas. And grid template areas allows us to assign what goes into each of those little sections that we have made. So imagine this one right here is grid template 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, then we go down. So we're going to call out the name of each thing that we want to throw into each of those spots. So if we do this, I'm now going to put a tab because it's a little bit easier, and it takes this quotation argument. And I'm going to say in the top row, we're going to have nav in that first spot, nav in that second spot, nav in the third spot, and nav in the fourth spot. Now in my next row, I'm going to start with my sidebar, and then I'm going to have 3 mains. If you look over here, we've got sidebar on here, and then 1, 2, 3 mains. So now with our next row, we are going to have sidebar again. And then we'll have content 1, content 2, and content 3. And let's take a look over here. We've got sidebar, content 1, content 2, content 3. Then we are going to have sidebar, footer, footer, footer. So let's go back into this again, and we'll do a sidebar, and then footer, footer, footer. Cool. All right, so now it may look like we've got it all set up, but we just placed what we want to call these, but we need to now edit these to give them those names. They don't have these names yet. We have to assign them those names. And how we do that is, let's say we open up our nav. We'll open up our nav CSS, and inside of this, I'm going to say that the grid area is equal to nav. And now we threw in our nav into all those areas. So let's try this again with sidebar. So we're going to say, now this I used an ID, so we need a # or a hashtag sidebar, and then this one is grid area is equal to our sidebar. And now it fills up our entire sidebar. Cool. So let's go through this. We're now going to try our main. So this one, our grid area, should be equal to main, which is what we named it. And it will update in a second. Oh, actually, this is not an ID. It's just the actual name of it. Cool. But now we've got 3 almost identical ones, so we're going to do content really quickly. So this is our content 1, and our grid area is equal to content 1. And then we'll close that up. And you can see they're already in that spot, but I want to actually have that laid out. So let me just copy this out. And then we can change this to a 2, this to a 2, this to a 3, this to a 3. All right, now let's do our footer. And here our grid area is footer. And that's looking pretty good. I think that I can change up these values a little bit more. We'll make the main a little bit bigger. That will move everything down. We'll make this fraction a little bit smaller. And this is looking pretty good. But now let's say that we want to edit everything inside of these containers. We may want to set over here. We want to center up all this. I'll do my text align center. Cool. And now that's a really quick way to actually set up this layout. And I can now see that I am blocking a good portion of it. But right there, we've got a lot easier way to set up our grid than what we were doing with floats. So that's a quick tutorial. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.